Arif and Eric, you can both start the recording in the French and English rooms. That'd be great. Thank you. And yeah, just settle in. If you'd like to add in the chat where you're joining us from, who you are, potentially, if you want to add what the weather's like today and you're part of Canada, please feel free to. We like to hear from you. And yeah, just wanted to make sure that everyone can see my screen, that says Hey Neighborhood Collective, which is great. And yeah, just hold on tight and we'll start soon. I see there's a lot of people starting to add where they're from, so thanks for doing so. We will start in about 2 minutes.
No, that's it. Go.
So I think I'm going to begin now. So hello, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the different lands on which we gather. For me, presently, they're the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the people of the Mississaugas of Credit, who have nurtured, loved, and lived on this time since time immemorial. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to create, collaborate, live, and work on this land and commit to do my best to care for it as a guest here. Wherever you may be joining us from, as I mentioned before, I encourage you to share your own acknowledgement in the chat. So hi, I'm Claire, and I'm part of the ECHO team here at CMHC. Today, ECHO is hosting a very exciting webinar entitled Social Sustainability and Multi-Unit Housing, Key Learnings from the Hey Neighborhood Collective. Before we begin, I just have a few notes I'd like to remind attendees of. We'll have about 10 minutes at the end of the presentation to discuss. Therefore, please, if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, drop them into the chat box in your language of choice, and we look forward to discussing afterwards. You will notice that you are muted, therefore, during the discussion period. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand or use the function to ask to be unmuted. Our webinar today is simultaneously translated into French. If you want to join the French room, there's a globe icon at the bottom of your screen with the word interpretation underneath. If you press on it, you will see that you can choose either the French or English rooms. The French rooms have a dubbed interpreter. Our webinars are member-driven, therefore the words and opinions expressed by the presenters are entirely their own. We encourage you to connect with the presenters after the webinar. Their emails will be posted in the chat nearing the end of the session. After, if you have further questions or would like to know more, please email us. Our email address will also be posted in the chat. This event will be recorded and will be uploaded onto the ECHO platform in the next few days. You will also be able to find it on the Hey Neighborhood Collective website. ECHO is a platform for collaboration, networking, and knowledge sharing across the housing realm. If you would like to know more or are not yet a member and like to become one, the link to sign up will also be added in the chat. So thank you all again for being here today, and we look forward to hearing more from you at the end of the presentation and questions that you may have. And I would like to pass it over to Michelle now.
Thank you very much, Claire. And Stacy, I just saw your question about when to start the polls, and I actually think it would be right now, and you have. So just a really quick poll to see where people are from. I'll take a second to do that. Wonderful. Already seeing some familiar names in the chat and some new ones, which is really nice. Exciting to have a blend. We were just talking about how it's we're getting a late snow here on the southwest coast of BC, and it's all anybody can talk about. It's the snow. And
so Michelle, I've just shared the poll results. I'm not sure if you can see them there. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So almost 60% of us from Western Canada, kind of Saskatchewan on west, and then Central 34 and Eastern Canada 4%. Thank you. That's great. Okay, and then question number 2 is kind of, I think, around what sector people are joining from. We realize this doesn't capture all sectors, so grab what fits best. Okay. Now, is that the results there, Stacy? Already? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So we've got the highest percentage actually from government, which is great. We got lots of housing folks, nonprofits, some researchers, and a nice smattering of all sorts of other folks. Okay, so this is great. I'm looking forward to see what kind of questions emerge from a really nice cross sector of participants. So we'll dive right into it. My name is Michelle Hoar. I am the project director for Hey Neighbour Collective, and let's go to the next slide. I will dive into a bit of an overview about Hey Neighbour Collective, but first I just want to talk about how important social connections really are. So Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad is one of the foremost global researchers on the health impacts of loneliness and social isolation. And this quote from the top is one that I really like and use a lot. Something she said during the pandemic is that being socially connected in meaningful ways is actually key to human health and survival. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. It's hardwired into us that we need human connection. We need meaningful connections with other people. There is the research she's done has actually shown that, chronic loneliness, like deep social isolation, can be as damaging as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And it increases the risk of premature death by as much as 50%. Conversely, strong social supports are protective for physical and mental health. They work against cognitive decline. So really, really important, not a fuzzy nice to have. So let's go to the next slide. And what we're particularly interested in Hey Neighbour Collective are neighborly social connections. And we had a wonderful researcher, a PhD candidate at SFU named Meredith Sones, do an evidence backgrounder for us specifically about the importance of neighborly social connections. So Stacy's putting some links to some resources in the chat while I talk, but there's lots of research to say that even social connections with your neighbors really leads to higher levels of happiness, well-being, and life satisfaction. In a crisis, you're more likely to give and receive help if you know your neighbors. I think we've probably all experienced that to some degree during COVID, or if you have been in one of any number of climate-related crises, whether it's a heat dome or a flood or a wildfire. It's really important to know your neighbors. They're literally, can save your life. And for children, youth, and older adults, there are benefits at all stages of our life in knowing our neighbors. Next slide, please. So Hey Neighbour Collective came about in the summer of 2019. It started off actually as a one-year pilot at the City of Vancouver, and I'm really happy to see that the architect of that project, Kelty Craig, is on the call here. It was a 12-month project in 2 buildings, very simple concept of a social coordinator, or deceptively simple maybe, having a part-time social coordinator connect with building managers to then reach out to residents to become resident animators and put on events and initiatives with neighbors. And it was working towards social connectedness goals in the City of Vancouver's Healthy City Strategy. So after that one-year pilot, a number of us who were on the advisory committee were really finding a lot of benefit in talking to each other about the kinds of work we were doing in this space. And so we came up with the collective, and it left the city and found a home at the SFU Morris J. Wask Center for Dialogue. So now we are a collective impact project made up of a number of different partners. The core of the collective is a set of what we call demonstration partners, and you're going to hear from 3 of them today: Brightside, West End Seniors Network, and Building Resilient Neighborhoods. And each of them are testing their own type of intentional programming to build community, social connections, and resilience in multi-unit housing. So that's really the through line for all of our partners. Is all of our partners are concerned about increasing trends in loneliness and social isolation, and interested in ways that we can intervene within multi-unit housing contexts to mitigate that. Why multi-unit housing? Mostly because in urban contexts in Canada, it is quickly becoming the dominant form of housing, particularly for middle and lower income households. And so we feel like there's a really important opportunity to work in that space. So some of our partners also include municipalities, our Metro Vancouver regional government, and Vancouver Coastal Health, and some really key rental housing associations on the West Coast, BC Nonprofit Housing Association and Landlord BC. Next slide, please. So I talked about our demonstration partners, our 6 currently, and again, you'll hear from 3 of them today. So they're all piloting different approaches and looking at how to scale them through their own organizations, but also out to others. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Oh, it is a next slide. I didn't even see it. And then we have research partners as well at SFU Urban Studies, Health Sciences and Gerontology, and also Happy Cities. And together, all of us are asking some very high level questions. So what is the impact of our partners' programs on resident well-being and their feeling of social connectedness? We are looking at the organizational benefits to doing this work. So is there a business case to be made for landlords to invest in this kind of programming? And we're looking at the role of built form in all of this. So how do we do good programming in buildings that might be very poorly designed for neighborly social connections? And how can we work together to advocate for better sociable design of buildings in the future? Next slide, please. I'm actually going to skip this slide because I want to make sure we have lots of time for our key speakers. The 3rd and 4th parts, kind of buckets as we like to think about it at Hey Neighbour Collective, are sharing stories and knowledge mobilization. So as we learn with all of our various different partners, we're wanting to share those learnings out more broadly into the housing sector, the health sector, urban planning, local government, whatnot. And so this webinar actually is at the culmination of a CMHC demonstrations grant, which helped us to really do a lot of important sense making from the last 3.5 years. And so we have a set of best practice guides and some videos that we'll share. And you'll hear some of those key learnings in the talks coming up. So this is just some examples of the kinds of knowledge products and knowledge mobilization we do. And then we do a lot of webinars and workshops with housing sector, with health sector, cross-sectoral dialogue to advance this kind of work and look at the kind of systems and policies that are informing all of it. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's it for me. I'm going to pass the torch on now to Stacy Barter, the ED of Building Resilient Neighborhoods, and she will tell us a bit about Connect and Prepare.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. It's so great to be here today, and I'm enjoying seeing lots of familiar faces in the chat. The platform doesn't allow us to see your video, but nice to know there's friends and allies in the crowd today, and also some folks joining us from other parts of the country. So I wear two hats. One is I have the pleasure of working with Michelle as the Director of Learning and Evaluation for the Hey Neighbour Collective as a whole. And then I also co-lead one of the demonstration partners. So Michelle mentioned we have a number of different partners testing different approaches to building social connectedness and resilience in multi-unit housing. We are one of them. So Building Resilient Neighborhoods is a small not-for-profit organization based in the traditional territory of the Algonquin-speaking people, which is also known as Victoria, BC. And we've been testing and scaling a particular program called Connect and Prepare, and working in partnership with the collective to advance this work. So next slide, please. So Connect and Prepare, the focus of Connect and Prepare is really about strengthening social connections and trying to build a culture of neighbors helping neighbors in order to be better prepared for emergencies and ultimately to be more resilient to different kinds of shocks and stresses that our communities are facing. And conversely, we also use the gateway of emergency preparedness, which many people are concerned about, to build and strengthen those social connections between immediate neighbors. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share a little bit about the philosophy, the approach, and how the program works, and then some of our key learnings. I'll just whip through my slides because I want to make sure I've got a chance to hear from Jennifer and Suzanne as well. So, the kind of core philosophy of Connect and Prepare is really this idea that social networks are absolutely critical to being better prepared for emergencies and for resilience overall. And this image that you're seeing on the screen right now is from a blog article by an academic in the US that studied the 2011 tsunami in Japan. And they looked at, in disaster recovery, what really made a difference to communities? What the communities that fared well recovering from that disaster, what were the critical elements? And I love the name of this blog article, Social Ties, Not Just Sandbags, as it really emphasized that those communities that have those strong social infrastructure, the social networks, are the ones who fare better. So that's really the underpinning of Connect and Prepare, that we're trying to strengthen that social infrastructure that we know will serve us in day-to-day emergencies, day-to-day stresses, but also hopefully those big events that may come our way and are coming our way a lot more frequently. Next slide, please. So our kind of core tagline that we like to put out to people is that it's not just what's in your kit, your emergency kit, but who is in your kit. And a lot of traditional emergency preparedness tends to focus on those supplies, having the bottled water. All of those things are very important, but what we're learning and what we're trying to promote through Connect to Prepare is that it really is your neighbors that in the event of an emergency, you probably are going to turn to next. So having strong relationships can make all the difference. Next slide. The other part of the approach of Connect and Prepare that we try and emphasize that I mentioned earlier is we want people to be better prepared for those big events. We're seeing more and more extreme weather events, certainly on the West Coast. We're seeing that more and more, and I think in other parts of Canada as well. But also knowing that people, in addition to those big things that we need to be prepared for, a lot of people are experiencing chronic stresses of different kinds. And so we think that by strengthening social relationships and connections between neighbors, we can ultimately build more of a culture of mutual aid that can help us with those kind of day-to-day stresses as well. Next slide. One of the things that has really motivated our scaling of Connect and Prepare was the experience in BC in 2021 with the heat dome event. And many of you probably know this. This is actually, I think, an outdated figure, this one that's on the screen here, but I think it was 619 people died during the 2021 heat event in BC. And a number of those, the majority of those were older adults, and the majority of them lived alone. And so this really emphasized what we had been seeing and sensing for some time, which is that we need to have those networks in place to check in on each other, and that can ultimately, hopefully, make a big difference in events such as this that we're seeing more and more. Next slide. So I'll just tell you a little bit about how the program works and a few of the lessons that we've been learning. You can go ahead to the next slide. The program is really, it's based on a community development model. So we work in multi-unit housing buildings in partnership with the collective. We also have run the program in the past at the block level, city block level, but right now we're really focused on multi-unit housing. So we bring together groups of neighbors. Usually we partner with housing operators that help us to get in touch with residents or get in touch with neighbors and identify potential residents that might be interested in helping to host the program. And then when we ran the program in Victoria, our organization, Building Resilient Neighbourhoods, partnered with the City of Victoria's Emergency Management Department, and we host a series of 3 facilitated workshops that neighbors go through together. As we've been scaling to other places, we've continued with that model of the local nonprofit partnering with local emergency management. And so the neighbors then go through a process of identifying their shared strengths and assets and some of the key vulnerabilities. And really it's an action planning process of bringing neighbors together to build relationships through the process and decide how they want to take action together to be better prepared and to stay more connected. It tends to be a lot of fun. There's a lot of sticky notes in the room, and Suzanne can tell you. Suzanne from Brightside, they've just had the program at some of their buildings, so maybe she can share about some of those experiences and all the sticky notes. But ultimately, where we're trying to get to is really encouraging and supporting resident leadership to continue to strengthen those relationships. And so the groups that go through the program, the neighbors themselves decide on projects that they want to do together. And they're quite diverse where they land. So some groups are really concerned with strengthening their emergency preparedness. Some are really wanting to focus on building more connections. And so you can see on the screen some examples of some of the projects that neighbors have decided to do in the past. Many of our buildings have set up buddy systems so they can check on each other in extreme weather events. Some have set up neighbor skill sharing workshops. Some have focused on longer term food security as an example. Go ahead to the next slide, please. I wanted to share this example. So I think that this story captures a fairly typical Connect and Prepare experience. So in one of our rounds of delivery in Victoria, we partnered with Capital Regional Housing, our local housing provider, and we worked with a number of their rent geared to income buildings, one of which was LeBlanc Place, which is a low-rise, particularly housing seniors with disabilities. And I learned so much from working with these champions and was so inspired that despite the fact that they were, many of them suffering from really chronic health conditions, were in and out of the hospital throughout the delivery of the program, they were just incredible community organizers. And so the group of neighbors came together, and some of the projects that they decided to work on were setting up healthy food distribution in their building. They realized that as low-income seniors, a lot of people were suffering from food insecurity, so they partnered with a local organization to bring food distribution into the building. They set up a buddy system to check in on each other in extreme heat events. And one of the champions took on organizing a grab and go party where they got a small grant to ensure that all the residents in the building had their sort of essential emergency supplies, and then hosted a workshop that actually was more of a party to put the kits together, knowing that many people couldn't afford that. So that's sort of a typical type of activity or project that we see coming out of the program. Next slide. Our pilot evaluation really has shown great results, and we're in the process of evaluating some of our scaling activities, but you can see that we're seeing that this process, through bringing neighbors together, they're getting to know each other, they're getting more prepared, and they're really getting more of a sense of that sense of agency and where they can take action. Next slide. Right now, one of the things we've been doing with the collective is scaling to 3 new communities. So we're partnering with City of North Vancouver, City of New Westminster, and City of Vancouver. And in each community, we have a nonprofit partner and local emergency management. And they are now delivering the program and testing out how to adapt it in their own community. And so lots of learning happening there. We've developed a train the trainer, and that's telling me it's time for me to stop so I can pass the torch to Suzanne. So lots of learning happening there, and we've been really exciting to be bringing this to other places, and our hope is that we can continue to scale. I have a few lessons that I'd love to share, but I'll wait till we get to the Q&A period, and I can share some of what we've been learning through this process, and I'll turn it over to Suzanne, I think.
Yeah, so we've got Suzanne Klassen from Brightside Community Homes next. Off you go, Suzanne.
Off I go. So hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Suzanne. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at Brightside. I've been there for almost a year now. Next slide. Thanks. Founded in 1952, Brightside is a charitable nonprofit organization that's privileged to provide affordable homes to 750 people on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Our mission statement says we create resilient communities throughout Metro Vancouver with safe and secure homes for those struggling to meet the demands of market housing. Brightside provides housing for those who can function independently in their day-to-day lives, with or without outside support. So we do not provide day-to-day living supports ourselves. Brightside has about 40 staff in total, and that's everyone from office staff to maintenance to, our Department of Community Development teams. So next slide, please. Brightside is a values-based organization and is committed to connecting tenants to programs and services that can help them age in place, and to providing opportunities for residents to strengthen social and community connection as a way to build strength and resilience. My position falls within the community development and resident support team. And as a community engagement coordinator, I tend to work more with groups of tenants and community agencies and networks. The resident support specialist, her work is often more one-to-one and often more connected with health related agencies and programs. And of course, the director orchestrates it all, including our fabulous partnerships that we benefit from so much. We work closely with each other and with other teams in the organization. We take an asset-based approach to building connections between tenants and between tenants and the community. So that means that we ourselves are quite connected to a lot of community agencies, universities, networks, local little groups, larger groups, anything we can get that might result in something useful for our residents is great. Next slide. Our tenants are about 76% seniors, so that's age 65 plus. About 16% of people are between 55 and 64, and then only 4% of people are under 54. Almost 70% have lived with Brightside for more than 6 years, with many having lived with us for, 15 is not uncommon to hear when you're out talking to people. Almost 70% of our residents live alone, and 10% have no social supports nearby, making them particularly vulnerable. And Stacy mentioned those sorts of vulnerabilities, probably are increasing, both with what's going on out in the world, but also as people age, of course, we're losing mobility, we're losing, a lot of different things that can assist us. So they're quite vulnerable there. We know that social relationships within multi-tenant buildings help residents get through day-to-day life and crises and emergencies. And we also know that the more socially connected residents are, the more supports they have nearby, the better they can be connected to programs and services offered in their neighborhoods. So the question becomes, how can we as a housing provider encourage connection and support? So next slide, please. Great. So one of the things that's been very helpful to us is formal surveying. We've done a lot of informal surveying in lobbies and events, and I think that Jennifer will have some great examples of that. They do that really well. But for our formal surveys, Brightside has partnered with Simon Fraser University and Hey Neighbour Collective for 3 yearly surveys so far. The most recent was the 21-22 fall-winter there. The surveys are designed to assess the state of social connectedness and well-being of residents and their satisfaction with Brightside. 27% of residents about filled out the survey. So we definitely balance that information with other information we get from the buildings and things that we hear from residents. We also have some ability with a database to pull sort of aggregate anonymous demographic kind of information, which can be helpful also. So we put this all together because it helps us establish collaborations with community-based agencies to help coordinate services that Brightside can't provide directly. It also helps us determine ways in which information, programming, and services could assist residents in maintaining their healthy tenancies. And it can help provide us some direction when Brightside engages in housing sector level advisory groups. So just to give you a quick example of how we use the survey information, as a result of the survey, we knew that many Brightside residents, about 40%, said they could benefit from support services ranging from meal preparation, light housekeeping, and then there were mental health supports, transportation, things like that. So we were very excited to work with a community agency called Senior Services Society, who piloted a service delivery model over 3 of our buildings, offering many of the services that residents had said they could use. There was less of an uptake, I think, than we'd hoped, but those who used the services were very appreciative, and it certainly helped us to understand the range of things that's out there and also the gaps that are out there. Next slide. So we've got the main sort of challenges we face here, and power imbalance is a real one. We are landlords after all, and so we've got a lot of power in terms of people's living arrangements for sure. And so even with a positive relationship, which we work pretty hard to cultivate, it may often be advantageous if we have the option to go to have outside programming or facilitators, because they're not involved in that power dynamic. And so coming in from the outside, there might be a better foundation to start with. The other challenges are fairly self-explanatory, but I just wanted to say in coming slides, we'll see how we can mitigate some of those as well through working with residents, but also through working with community. So the main thing really here is resident champions are really easy to spot. When I went out into the buildings at first, they're the same people I see now. They're the ones who show up for everything, and you often run into them when you're at the buildings. You might meet them first with complaints or more than one complaint, but they're able to move beyond that somehow. And they're usually well-respected members in their building or in their community if there's several buildings together. They're usually able and willing to collaborate with a variety of partners. They're interested in creating connection opportunities within their communities, and they can be great sources of information, input, and feedback. We just recently started a resident advisory committee, and it's these community champions who became the inaugural members. The resident advisory works on growing social connection within Brightside and the community and has an outside facilitator, which is great. They're working on developing their first project, so that's really exciting. Next slide. So for Brightside, community relationships have been essential for building strong, resilient, inclusive communities. If we look back at the barriers listed in the previous slide, partners with the community agencies can help solve a lot of them. So, you know, we definitely face capacity challenges in terms of a lot of things that we would love to do. We just don't have the staff to do it all. So when we partner with other agencies, they can come in and do the things. You know, they can come in and provide the facilitation. They can bring the programming with them. So that's a really great way to work with the community. I've already mentioned, you can see we have a lot of partnerships there, and that's not all of them by any means. But, you know, I mentioned Senior Services Society in the past. We also work with a lot of other agencies, academic institutions. We're working with Queen's University to support their OASIS programming that's running in 2 of our buildings. We've worked with Simon Fraser around built form. I think the students are doing a survey right now around the built forms and how that works with social connection in the buildings. So we've got lots of things like that going on. We also benefit really a lot from being part of the Hey Neighbour Collective. but also small kind of neighborhood collectives. Like I'm part of a reconciliation and action team in an area where we have several buildings. And so that's a really great way to see who's doing the work, what kind of work they're doing, how we might participate, all that kind of stuff. I have a great example at the end here. Stacy was right. I'm going to sing the praises of Connect and Prepare because we have had them. We just wrapped up the first 3 sessions in 2 buildings. One of the buildings has no amenity space at all. They were meeting in their lobby. We got lots of people out. They are super excited. The building without the lobby is going to do an earthquake preparedness kit. The other building, a bit larger building and a bit more of a less connected building, they are going to go ahead and have a pizza party to get more people out to talk about preparedness, but they are a really key bunch. So it's been really great. For me, sort of the pinnacle of this kind of work is tenant-led initiatives. Like if they can go and do that, and if I can support them, that's fantastic. You know, we'll never stop doing other kinds of initiatives, but it's really, really great to see that spirit and that energy around tenant-led stuff. So that's about it for me. I hope I didn't talk too fast. Our next presenter is Jennifer Conroy from the West End Seniors Network, and she'll have lots of great ideas for you as well. Thank you.
And Jennifer, before you start, I'm just going to let participants know that there will be a bit of time for Q&A. We will formally close the session at 11, so people can go, but we can all stay for a few more minutes till 11:15 if the Q&A is rich and people want to keep chatting.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks, Stacy. So yes, we are one of the assets and one of the community partners and a proud member of the Hey Neighbour Collective. We are the West End Seniors Network. We do 55 plus programming and services for the West End, and Close to Home helps neighbors make friendly, lively places. And I am here in 2 roles. Like Suzanne, I also started about 1.5 years ago. First as the Close to Home person. So the logic of this program was my entire focus. And I am now the manager of all of the social, recreational, and cultural programming. So my insights come from both angles. Next slide. So the West End Seniors Network, we're in a heritage building in the West End, and we offer activities and resources and services. We've got 3 sites, and in any given year, we have over 100 activities separate from the services that we provide. We have quite an age range, mostly women. In addition to English, our language groups are Farsi and Cantonese, mixed income, mixed mobility, mixed levels of wellness. And in the last year, we have a new EDI policy and plan and more out trips and more cultural events. We've got numbers back from last year, and since I started, our participation numbers have really increased a lot. So we are a social generator. This is what we do, is we activate connections. So to Suzanne and anybody who is speaking as a place where there is common space to activate, we're particularly well equipped to help activate and sustain and accelerate these kinds of connections. Next slide. So what does Close to Home look like for us? We added 4 buildings over 3 years. They are of varying types and starts. One is an independent leasehold. We've got 2 that are managed housing and what are called multi-barrier communities. And another, which we're just adding, is a nonprofit housing society. So yes, any older resident, in fact, anyone in the West End can reach out for support in creating one of these in a building. Many of the buildings in the West End are NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities. Things that are key: shared spaces, a history of shared activities in the building, as other people have alluded to, enthusiastic residents willing to lead the support of building management, and from us, from the seniors organization in that coordinator role, we give them consistent help and encouragement, and this is really key. Next slide. So once you have a building that says, yes, I'd like to do this, how do you make it happen? There are lots of things I can tell you how not to start things. But I'll start with going in with relaxed, fun ways to gather their ideas. Each building is an ecosystem, is a social ecosystem of people who know what they want and what they need and how they are going to spend their time. And the biggest thing is to go in with the intention of building rapport and trust, getting introduced to a couple of people. Start with a lunch and listen, start with a sandwich club, buy lunch and meet a couple of people. As Suzanne said, it's a way to gather information, and it's social in and of itself. So some broad categories. There's a couple of photos here of people talking and adding colored dots to a board of broad categories. It's a way for them to meet me, to know that I am from an organization that is already committed and has a long record of demonstrated successes in building these kinds of things. And it doesn't matter if in the future this building does these activities, but that they have their meeting and they're talking about it, and new people get to join and new activities get to be gathered and new interests get to be gathered. The person in the second photo is one of the resident leaders. I've got a handout on this, which we can send. I've written this up. This is also paired with a door-to-door survey. So there are two ways to gather numbered items of who's interested in what, and then compare it to the social aspect that takes place in the lobby. We've now done this in 4 buildings. And yep, every building is different. The important thing is to spend time listening to things that they like to do, things that they'd like to do with and for others. Next slide. This is the role of the coordinator or the staff person. It's really important when these connections are new among people or groups who are on the social isolation scale, who might be part in multi-barrier scenarios, that some encouragement and being in touch regularly is necessary. Talk through plans with the residents, start a contact list, help them promote events, offer to cover the cost of snacks and supplies, and gather more people and document and report. We wrote up what we did, we published it in our newsletter, and I've got extensive photos and we keep monthly stats of everything that we're doing. I would say that all of our buildings now are doing 1 to 2 events per month, and this has come along. Next slide. So, then the slide before that. There's a slide before that.
Sorry, just 1 second. It's hard to
Okay.
get back. Sorry, 1 second.
I'll just start that slide contact. What happens if nobody joins? What happens if you have a contact in a building and somebody's keen to do something they like, and you put up a poster and nobody comes to something? A slow build is normal. If you have an event and 10 people sign up and only 3 people come, you didn't fail. Those 3 people are really important. Remember, starting small. You're not being graded on this. There's always a good time to think about what you'd like to do next season with people. If resident animators are having a tough time getting started or getting things off the ground, then this is the benefit of us being part of a seniors network, is that we can, there we go, that's the slide, is that we can invite them to things at the seniors network, and they can meet each other and they can gain strength from us and recharge through their connections to us, which then they can take back to their own buildings. Encourage self-care, figure out an activity that they like to do, repeat it, refine it, share it. So Tara, from the previous page, a year ago when we started, people weren't coming and she was a little bit discouraged. And now they get about 8 to 10 people coming every time. And she now adds activity coordinator into her email signature. So this building has more events. It's got more people coming. It's got a stable group that meets regularly. And she has more of a sense of herself as a leader and has more self-efficacy with her capacity to build these. Let's go to the next slide. And it can go badly. So often when we think about social plans, there is an idea of doing a big event. This is going to be really great. Here's a couple of things to avoid, and this is not just from close to home, but this is from my experience programming for the center itself. Too demanding, big long forms, asking people to sign up to identify a team of 4 or 6, asking them to make a long commitment. Drop-ins are good, casual is good, prizes. Taking people to say outside provider gets in touch and wants to have a prepay minimum booking, too complicated. Sometimes the charismatic people in the group, sometimes it's good to cultivate relationships with people who are quietly dedicated to a small activity that they'd like to lead. Also, once you get into this, people will tell you, oh, seniors should do this, families should do this. The best activities, the most effective groups are led by the person themselves who enjoys that activity and is dedicated to sharing it, to facilitate their leadership. Next slide. This is the last one. The key learnings. Every building has residents who are expert in their needs and interests and wants. And I think I'm running out of time, but what is, we could do more buildings. We could go more into preset programming, but letting people develop their directions and supporting them in that over time. I could end it there.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. We knew this was going to be tight timing. 1 hour is so short when you've got a few presenters. So thanks everybody for keeping a bit of an eye on time. We will flip to some questions now. I see some already coming up in the chat. Stacy, I wanted to just quickly give you a chance because you didn't get to some of your key learnings. Like, what are the really big ones, like that are just like that kind of scream at you after years of doing this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually many of them Suzanne and Jennifer spoke to as well. And so it's great to see and interesting to see the threads across different programming approaches. So I think the big ones that have stood out to me are the importance of partnerships and really playing to our strengths. So, you know, Suzanne, your example of how Brightside is partnering with really different types of organizations to support you in your role as a housing operator. That's been our experience with Connect and Prepare as well. So the beauty, I shared the partnership model of our emergency management experts, the local nonprofits, the tenant leaders, and the housing operators who create enabling environments. And I think the other thing that really has been such a key learning for us is the important role of housing operators in being enablers for this type of community building to happen. And we've really experienced both things. We've had housing operator partners who, like Suzanne, who, you know, is supportive and really trying to create a culture of tenant leadership, for example. And we've experienced the opposite, where actually housing operators can be extreme barriers to tenants doing community building in the places and spaces where they live, and a lot of fear around tenants organizing. So I think there's work to be done there, and I think this is part of an effort to like shift the culture of multi-unit housing, and housing operators have a really key role. So those were some of the key things. The other things that I had on my list that I think Jennifer and Suzanne spoke to are just that, like, the absolute importance of resident champions, and that those sometimes can be the unusual suspects, that they don't have to look a certain way. But that tenant-led leadership is really, really critical. And the key to sustainability is that it is resident-led, and that the rest of us in our different organizational roles are supports for that resident leadership.
Although at the same time, I think one of the learnings from the collective as a whole, Stacy, has been that actually that professional coordination is also part of sustainability, right? There was a question in here about how to keep the program alive after the original launch without support teams. So we actually do think that those support teams are critical. So it is hard to just launch a program and expect volunteers to run with it forevermore. We do need to find ways of supporting those professional coordinators to keep this kind of stuff going, even if there is significant, tenant leadership in it, and because there always is going to be tenant overturn too, right? There's going to, yeah. So another question that came in that I think is a really important one was around just the importance of people's actual stability of housing. So many people having a hard time actually keeping up with increasing rents and facing losing their homes. So Suzanne, I'm wondering if you can just speak to keeping people housed and the role of some of these partnerships that you have in actually helping people to keep stable tenancies.
Sure, and there's, again, so many connections that come into play if we start with the residents. If somebody goes and has an operation and comes back, and is needing help, then the residents are those that can come and assist so that the person is able to stay home and heal and do all those things. Oftentimes we'll see residents buying groceries for people, or they'll call us with concerns about someone, all sorts of things like that. So when you have that kind of spirit of mutual aid in a building, or even within a small group within a building, that's great. As we keep going, though, I know my colleague is often trying to connect people to health services. Do they need home care? Do they need someone to help with a specific thing? Or, can we find someone to connect them to? To be honest, there are residents who do not want to connect to services, and there's really not a lot we can do about that. But we can try. We certainly do try and bring in the other programs that come in. So Senior Services Society, like I said, was offering the integrated services pilot, which brought some services to people, but also raised some questions about why more people weren't taking them up on this, and what was going on about that. So we learned a lot from that experience, and it wasn't our program. We were just supporting, making sure they had keys and putting signs up in the lobbies to tell people they were coming. So all of those kinds of things are great. And then having the resources of something like Hey Neighbour Collective, or where not only from the group itself, but also from all the members. I learned a ton from Jennifer. I learned a ton from all sorts of from Kyoko who comes. So it's that kind of thing too. It gives us more ideas, more energy about how can we support these people, because it's better for us as a landlord, even if we're only just a landlord, it's better for us for people to stay in their places safely for as long as possible. But we know that's, as a values-based organization, we know that's better for the residents as well. So, everything, I think, in the best of all possible worlds, it comes together in a lovely cloud. So, yeah.
Yeah. We hear a lot of talk from particularly the nonprofit housing operators in our networks that that actually avoiding evictions is very ongoing work that is quite complex, and that those partnerships and those support roles that help people to navigate the systems they need to navigate in order to get the supports to keep their housing it's absolutely critical. It's the underlay of all of this work, because if you can't keep your home, you're not putting down roots, and the stress of housing insecurity is enormous, and no amount of lobby parties and workshops can can counteract that. We have a question here, and I think this might be lobbed to Suzanne again. How do we encourage cultural safety or reconnect communities where there have been conflicts between members or between neighbors?
I think, again, you know, having a strong facilitator, especially where there's been conflict. I've done a lot of conflict resolution. So yeah, having a strong facilitator who, you know, is aware of what's going on and that kind of thing. And then a good structure. Restorative justice has some really good group structures for handling conflict, which may be presented on the surface or underneath. So I'd encourage everyone to look into, you know, restorative approaches, very circle-based, you know, all the kinds of things you'd expect. And sometimes, you know, you need to be pretty firm in terms of handling things, but again, it's about connecting people through empathy. And, you know, so even your opening round can be hugely important in, you know, just a simple question. I didn't realize that about that person that maybe I said rude things about, or I didn't realize they came, you know, this happened to them. So we saw a lot of that, and having worked in that situation in high conflict seniors buildings, you know, we ended up with people saying things like, I didn't realize how intolerant I had become, and that kind of thing. With specific issues, you know, between two people, that's maybe a different process, but we certainly, you know, for instance, we had an issue where somebody unfortunately was evicted, but there had been sort of a scary lead up to that for residents. And so we got together with them, with the community police, with the policeman who was assigned to them. And, you know, a lot of people came out and they were anxious to tell their stories, but I think in a very measured way, we allowed that for sure. And we were able to build from that so that people really understood what had been done, what we can't tell them had been done, you know, those kinds of things, because there's privacy concerns, right? So any kinds of those things, but I'd be happy to, you know, talk more about that if you want to reach out. So.
Thanks, Suzanne. We had another question about any tips for working in diverse vertical communities where there are lots of different languages and therefore some challenges to building community. If any of you have any good tips there.
Again, I think the connection is great because, you know, people can bring friends who can translate for them. We've seen that happening. We're very limited just budget-wise in terms of interpretation. So we're looking for stuff that's already interpreted and translated. So, you know, the Community Response Network has been great that way. I've been able to get lots of things in Chinese that I can hand out, and that will connect people to other resources. So, you know, we just look for anything that's out there. Who's working with that population? Can we bring them in? You know, how can we do that? So yeah, just get creative and look around and see who's available.
For us, craft attract people across language groups. So do movement classes. Doing celebrations that are from other people's cultures, making those treats, learning to make those treats, and doing fireworks and learning to make mooncakes. We also at the center, we have some ESL classes, which it's part of an idea would be how do we bring some of our successful programming on site where some of those language groups are. Those are ways we have had some successes mixing.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, in some ways it's perhaps stating the obvious, but oftentimes when we are looking to recruit champions who want to co-host or bring Connect and Prepare into the building, being quite intentional on our part around being aware of the demographics of the building and seeking out people from different demographic communities and ensuring that that representation is among the community of people who are helping to organize is really, really critical.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I'm mindful that it is 2 minutes to kind of the hour. So we have popped in an evaluation survey for those of you who can quickly click on that and give us some feedback. That would be great. It'll also help us to kind of stay connected to you if you want to keep talking or engaged with Hey Neighbor. And those who want to stay for another 15, maybe even 20 minutes and keep talking, we'll do that. So I'll just thank everybody so much for coming. Claire, I don't know if CMHC had any quick things you wanted to say before the hour, and then we can go on.
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really robust conversation, very important one. So thank you for having it today. I'm so happy that we had so many people join us, and I have to pop off, but I hope the conversation continues, and I'll follow up with you. And the recordings will all be posted, like I mentioned before, in ECHO, and I will be sharing it with Hey Neighborhood Collective so they can put it up on their website. And yeah, I think the decks also be shared, Michelle. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
they will be
Yeah.
on ECHO as well in the
Yeah.
next few
Yeah.
days. So thank you so much, everyone.
Great. And we will also, if people want to type in a question but can't stay, in the past, when we've had too many questions that we can't get to, we will do a bit of an interview with our speakers